Hello and welcome back to Geek and Speak, the Geek and Seek podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about some of our favorite cards from the upcoming set, Murders at Karlov Manor. Really excited for this set. A lot of really cool cards. We're going to be each going over our top 5. That's 15 cards, but there's still going to be a bunch of awesome cards that we're not going to get to talk about. That's just how much awesome stuff is in this set. So, joined with me today is Preston. Preston, how's it going, man?
I'm good, doing pretty good today.
That's what I like to hear. And then Jason, how's it going, bro?
You know, it's going okay. Didn't have the best weekend. The Lions lost, but it is what it is. We'll be back next year. Still, go Lions. I'm still out here representing. Still love my team. I've seen us lose a lot, so one loss in the NFC Championship game ain't gonna do me dirty like that.
Yeah. No, you're used to being a loser. It was funny when the new episode of Upkeep came out a couple days ago or last week, and at the end when the end screen's popping up, you're like, "Go Lions!" And Steven's like, "I bet the Super Bowl's already going to happen by the time this video comes out." Just about. And then, hi, I am your host Morgan, and I'm also doing pretty good. I'm excited for this list, and some of these cards are pretty sweet. So before we hop into it, if you want to support the show, if you want to support our gameplay, our podcast, some of the other stuff we have brewing, you can join us on Patreon. Jason's going to have the URL pop up on screen somewhere. I don't remember what it is. And then if you can't support us financially, you can also help us out by just checking out some of our other content. Go watch some of our videos that you maybe haven't seen, like the videos, comment on the videos. That helps boost us in the algorithm. That also helps a lot. Let's go ahead and hop into a little bit of news before we hop into our top 5 lists. Jason, you want to hit this first little piece?
So this upcoming Friday, we are getting the release of Murders at Karlov Manor. The topic of this list is our favorite cards from that set, so we're going to get into those cards and talk about why we're excited for this set and what cards we're looking forward to. Make sure you go out to your local game stores on Friday, pick up some Murders at Karlov Manor.
Yeah, and let us know in the comments what some of your favorite cards are, because, like I said, there's so many cool cards. There's no way in heck we're going to have time to cover all of the cool cards. So if there's any that we don't mention today, drop them in the comments, let us know. And then Preston, what do you have up next for us?
All right, so for you guys, we're going to be putting out a little bit more content coming up here soon. So each Monday of the month, we are either going to have a new arena gameplay video for Morgan, or we're going to be doing some new shorts for you guys.
Yeah, and that's just to help keep a little bit more content coming for you guys, since we have between the gameplay show and the podcast that we haven't had as much content, so it'll just help get you guys a little bit more to enjoy more Geek and Seek. And then the last thing to mention is that we have some new merch coming soon. We'll have exact details before the end of February. We'll have exact details, but that's coming pretty soon. So you can follow us on social medias. We have links to all of our social medias in the description of this video. That's a good way to keep up with it. And then we'll make sure to mention it in videos as the details finalize. Yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. And if you're joining us on Patreon, you'll get 10% off your merch. So that's another reason to join. Yeah, and then speaking of social medias, as we're hopping into our list, I had a couple cards from some fans who left comments on our socials of a couple cards that they wanted to mention. So Thomas on Instagram said that he was really excited for the new Voya because it's a new interesting word play on elves. So that's something to be excited about. And then Charisse, the legend, commented that she's really interested in the new Judith. So are we. We will get really into Judith here in a bit. Who wants to start us off with their first card on our top 5 list for Murders at Karlov Manor?
Okay, go ahead, Preston.
Okay. So first up, I had Worldsoul's Rage. It is an X red-green sorcery that says it deals X damage to any target, and then you put X land cards from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So this card seems really interesting to me. You get to deal a lot of damage to someone's face, take out one of their best creatures, and then you get to flood all of your lands in from your graveyard. So you can bring back like your sacrifice lands, your lands that have like other effects if you, all that kind of stuff.
Lands.
Yep. So this card seems really powerful in the right type of deck, and I don't currently have a deck to put this in, but I might find a place here soon because this seems really strong to me.
Jason, do you have anything to add?
So this was actually going to be one of my top 5 cards. I think that this is an insanely powerful card, especially for only being, I mean, this could be 4 mana, deal 2 damage to any target, put 2 lands onto the battlefield. That's pretty nice. It could be 5 mana, do 3 damage to any target, and 3 lands onto the battlefield. That's really good. And I mean, this is one of those X-cost spells that, you know, it seems to just get better the more mana you put into it. And even if you don't put a ton of mana into it, it's still efficient. Because, like, think about Pull from Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, think about Pull from Tomorrow. Pull from Tomorrow is blue X, and it's, you know, you draw a card, you draw X cards, and then you discard a card. 3 mana to draw 1 card and discard a card it seems really bad. 4 mana to draw 2 cards and discard a card seems really bad. It seems way too expensive for the payout. And so my point is, worldsoul's Rage just doesn't seem like it's a bad payout rate. Doesn't matter if you only put 1 mana into it, or if you put 2 mana into it, or if you put 10 mana into it. It's going to provide the value that you're looking for.
To play off of your point, I mean, it just scales so well. I mean, there are situations where this is just, you probably won't, but there are situations where you just put X equals 1 and you pick off someone's mana dork, or you hit them in the face for 1 just to send a message, and then you get to play an extra land from your hand. You know, there are situations where it's just that.
Or you deal 1 damage to somebody's planeswalker.
Yeah,
it's any target.
Yeah, it's any target. It hits battles. Heck yeah!
Yes,
it's gonna flip our battles.
It's such a good card. I when I saw this was on Preston's list, I got sad because I wanted it on my list.
It's a cool card because I don't think it's quite Gruul staple level. I don't think it's quite the level of a staple, but it's not. It doesn't really require much brewing around either. It's that nice sweet spot where I think a lot of decks are going to want it, but it doesn't have to be like an auto include. Like for instance, like I think a lot of those Gruul landfall decks are going to want it, because even if you're not playing a bunch of fetch lands and channel lands and you have a bunch of lands in your graveyard, even if you're not that deck, if you're playing like a landfall deck in these colors, you're just going to accidentally end up with too many lands sometimes. And this will let you get value out of those, so you don't have to restrict yourself to the 1 land per turn or whatever, while also being a decent removal spell. Not great, but it's okay. And then I just finished that deck I mentioned last episode. That's my Naya Deserts deck with Hizazon as the commander. I've just finished that deck. I'm definitely picking up one of these for that, because I'm just going to, you know, end up with a bunch of deserts in my graveyard anyways, and this is a good way to build back pretty quick and not have to limit myself to the 1 per turn that Hizazon gives. So I really like this card.
Personally, I'm going to disagree with you on this not being a Gruul staple, because in my opinion, this is probably the perfect Gruul card. It's got that exact thing that red does, damage, and then, you know, it's got the putting lands in with green. To me, it's just the perfect Gruul sorcery.
Yeah, my only I think the only reason I might disagree with that is just because you want to be able to get both modes, right? If it's just a removal spell for X, it's not very good. If it's just getting the lands back, it's okay. But if you want to make sure you get both, so you want to have either a plethora of lands in your deck so that you're naturally going to have a bunch of lands in your hand to get that value, and or have a bunch of lands that are going to end up in your graveyard, whether that be channel lands, fetch lands, or if you're a Corvold deck and you're sacrificing your lands, whatever the deal might be. You want to make sure that you have the means to get used out of both modes. So I do think it goes in a lot of decks. I just don't think it goes in literally every Gruul deck, if that makes sense.
That's fair.
Yeah. Jason, why don't you talk to us about your first card?
So my first card is Slice from the Shadows. It's an instant for black and X. Got another X cost spell on here. And it's an instant that says this spell can't be countered. Target creature gets -X until end of turn. But there's one small line of text that, and there's a cycle of these cards, but I like Slice from the Shadows a lot. And in parentheses as reminder text where it says this spell can't be countered, it says this includes by the ward ability. So now we're getting, and this brings up a couple questions to me. Does that just mean that all spells now that have been printed that say this spell can't be countered, does that now get around the ward ability? It
actually always has, because ward is not the same thing as it's not the same thing as like hexproof or shroud where you can't target it. Is you do get to target it, but if you don't pay this cost, the spell is countered. So like Atrix and Nev has ward 2. So like if you're going to target Atrix and Nev, you can, but the spell that's targeting it will be countered if you don't pay the cost. So
unless it says this spell can't be countered.
Yeah, so all cards that say this can't be countered means you don't have to pay the ward cost.
That makes sense. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Which is why Void Rend is the truth, man. It's awesome.
But this is just a really nice, black removal spell that can go into any black deck or any deck that has black in it, and it can't be countered. I mean, I don't know how many of those actually exist in mono black. I'm going to go out on a limb and say none. And if I'm wrong, prove me wrong in the comments. Please do. I would like to learn more. But I don't think that an ability like this has ever been put on any mono black card, any mono black instant like this. And another reason why I really like this card is because it is an instant. It gets around indestructible. It's kind of like Toxic Deluge without the life, and it's an instant, but it's only for one creature. So maybe it's not like Toxic Deluge at all. But I don't know. I mean,
it
this
is
card.
really mana intensive, but
I think that for black to get a card like this that can't be countered, it's just something that the color hasn't really had a whole lot of. And I think that it was really interesting that they added it in, especially on a removal spell like this. And in a game of Commander, it's not unheard of to have 4 mana or 5 mana untapped on your turn waiting to respond to somebody. I mean, ideally, if you're in a more competitive situation, I guess you would want to be spending less mana on something. But in a casual game of Commander, I think that this card is really going to shine in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, I think it's really good in like if you're playing like PDH, like we played recently on the show. This seems pretty good. It gets around indestructible creatures. So if you have like someone in your play group has a lot of indestructible creatures, if someone in your play this gets a little metagamey, but if someone in your play group has like a commander with ward, gets around that. If you have control mages in your group, gets around that. I think for this card to really be worth it, it's almost metagamey, but it seems okay.
Here's what I was thinking when I first saw this card. I thought of this, especially because it's an instant, I thought of this as like, okay, let's say you swing at somebody who has an indestructible creature. Their creature still takes the damage.
Mm-hmm. It's
just indestructible. It can't be destroyed. So like, let's say it's a 4/4 and you block with a 3/3. It still has 3 points of damage on it. So if you give it that -1/-1, it's dead. And it's gone, so I was thinking about situations like that where you can kind of get tricky in combat with it. But I think that it's better. You kind of look at it initially and you see it's a common instant, it black and X, I got to pay 5 mana just to kill a 4/4. That's not very great. But it's a little bit more versatile than that, I think.
Yeah, the fact that it's an instant does open it up a lot. Preston, do you have anything to add about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really strong at the common level for sure. Not really a card I'm super interested in just because black's really bad at making a lot of mana, which you want for this card.
What? No, it's not.
Black
classic.
It's bad at making a lot of mana that you keep around for a long time.
No, it's not.
It's good at short spurts of mana.
Urborg Cabal Coffers.
Yeah. It's auto-included in all black decks.
That's like...
If you get your 2 specific lands in your black deck, yes, that combo is very good.
Hey,
otherwise it can have a lot of issues.
If you're playing a mono black deck and you're not getting Urborg and Cabal Coffers out every game, you're not playing mono black right, my friend.
I've had games where I've demonic tutor for one of those lands.
Yes.
It's just that good. If you don't have a combo, like an actual combo that like wins you the game, those are good tutor targets just because it's like, I'm just going to have absurd amounts of mana whenever I want. It's insane.
Even casting a dark ritual for 1 black mana before this, and then you use that to cast Slice from Shadows, you're killing a 2/2. I mean, there's a lot of... I mean, think about like I can't think of any besides Dockside right off the top of my head.
You don't even care if you kill Dockside because it already did its thing, you know? You don't even care if you kill Dockside.
You did just use one of the best black cards ever printed to kill a 2/2, but, you know, feels a little
is
bad.
Dark Ritual one of the best black cards ever printed? Is it a top 10 black card all time? I think
if you're playing, I think in certain decks, Dark Ritual is like a contender. But it's only for specific decks. If you're just playing like a generic black deck, I don't think it's worth it. But I think in a lot of... There are certain decks that Dark Ritual will actually be one of the best cards in your deck. Like if you're playing a Storm deck or, you know, something like that.
It's safe to say this might be my most controversial card on the list. But I saw it, and I saw this spell can't be countered, and it's an instant, and I was like, this seems really good. It seems better than what people might originally think. And I'm going to play it in a couple of decks, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I understand you putting it on here. It's just not my card.
Yeah. Well, I'm also cool with you guys picking more controversial cards. It makes the conversation more interesting. So I have to give a quick honorable mention to my number 6 card because it was almost my number 5. I went back and forth until literally we were hit record today. Vein Ripper was almost my number 5 card. For 6 mana, it's a 6/5 vampire assassin with flying, and it has ward, sack a creature. And then whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So it's kind of like a giant blood artist. It's a similar effect, but it's 6 mana and on this giant creature. It's kind of ridiculous. It's definitely overkill. Like, Blood Artist is actually probably the better card because it comes out on turn 2 instead of turn 6. But this card is awesome. So I just had to give it a quick shout out because it's so cool.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yes.
I think if they made it 3 black and 1 and made it a 3/3, I think that would be just as good. I think it would be fine.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it needed to be a 6/5 for 6 mana. That just seems...
No, other than the cool factor, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, it's Blood Artist for Timmy.
Yeah.
You know, Timmy wants the big creature, but he wants the Blood Artist. Because Blood Artist is just a 2 mana 0/1. That's not cool. That's not Timmy. But now Timmy can play Blood Artist effects. Yeah. My actual number 5 is Trouble in Pairs. So this is from, I believe, the Boros Precon. So it's not in the main set. But it's for 2 white as an enchantment that says if an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. More importantly, though, whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. That's a lot of card draw, my friend. You are easily drawing multiple cards every turn rotation. If this draws me... Well, I mean, just think about how often those things are going to happen, right? Like, the token deck all of a sudden can't really attack you if they want to keep you from drawing cards. The storm deck is completely shut off. Fair decks are often shut off in the mid to late game because of that effect. I mean, this is insane. Is this the White Rhystic study? Well, actually, it's better than the White Rhystic study because you don't have to ask any stupid questions. You just do it. So this card's kind of insane.
This is probably the best card draw spell that White has ever received. I can't think of one that's better than this off the top of my head. I mean, first of all, you're telling that blue player to go screw themselves and their extra turns. You're like, get out of here with that stuff. This is fair Magic we're playing right now.
And to me, that's like flavor text almost. Because like, how often does that even happen?
I think it's so interesting that I almost feel like this card kind of breaks the color pie because it's not really balancing things out. It's really taking stuff away from your opponents and giving you an advantage. I mean, the second ability is definitely very White and balancing stuff out. You know, whenever your opponents do something, you get to draw a card, keep everything balanced. But then you add in that if an opponent would take an extra turn, they skip that turn instead. It's like, wow.
Well, so White has a lot of like taxing and stacking kind of effects. But to me, I agree. The fact that you don't have to pay mana. Like Esper Sentinel, Rhystic Study should have been a white card. I'll die on that hill. You know, like stuff like that. It does feel kind of weird as a white card. But Preston, what do you think?
I think it makes perfect sense as a white card because, yeah, with the second one, you're not stopping anything. In the first one, you're just not letting them take extra turns. They're still getting their regular turns, so it is a balancing act in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Fair point.
No,
It's
it
just
does feel white. The part that didn't feel white to me was the fact that you don't have to pay to keep the ability. Like, think of like
Mentor of the Meek.
Mentor of the Meek, or well, that's like helping you by paying. But I was thinking more like Thalia. Your opponent's non-creature spells cost one more, or your Esper Sentinels, the non-creatures, you get to draw a card. You know, like that stuff feels very white to me. And the fact that you don't have to pay any mana, you just do get those extra cards is kind of insane. Yeah, this card's kind of bonkers.
This is, I think, a staple. That's a lot of text.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that this is probably. Oh man.
The only argument for
Esper
it maybe...
Esper is really the white Rhystic Study. I mean, if we really want to get down to it, it's the exact same ability basically. I don't know. This to me, this definitely falls into white staple though. Like this is right there with Smothering Tithe, Teferi's Protection, like those white staple cards that you're probably gonna put in every single deck you have that has white in it, especially if it's a white enchantment deck. Yeah. This is one of the best cards in that deck now.
Well, and there are some colors and color combinations that just straight up can't get rid of enchantments. So enchantments are they're good because they're more likely to stick around. The only argument for it maybe not being a staple is it reads kind of, I mean, it's better, but it reads kind of similar to Smuggler's Share. And everyone thought Smuggler's Share was going to be like a white staple. And it's good, but it's not broken, you know? It's not the audio include we thought Smuggler's Share was. That's my only argument, but I don't know. It is better than Smuggler's Share, so it probably is kind of bonkers. But yeah, we can go ahead and move on to Jason's next card if he's ready. Or who was first?
Preston's up next. Preston is next.
All right, okay. Next up, I have Trostani 3 Whispers. It's a legendary creature dryad 4/4 for a green white hybrid mana, and then a white mana. And then it has 3 abilities. 1 in a green, target creature gains Death Touch until end of turn. A hybrid green or white mana, target creature gains Vigilance until end of turn. Or 2 in a white, target creature gains Double Strike until end of turn. This card, you guys were kind of memeing on it in the group chat a little bit, but I think it's super powerful. 1, you don't have to target your own creatures, so you can kind of screw with your opponents when they're doing their combat steps. Take someone out with someone else's commander with that Double Strike. You can do some vigilance, like, hey, I'll give you vigilance on your best creature if you don't swing at me. I'll give you some Death Touch if you don't swing at me. You can do a whole lot with this commander and never even touch your own creatures. But you can, and she's a 4/4? That's pretty insane for a 3-cost commander. Like, this is a lot of stuff.
I don't really know why Trostani got 4/4 power with these 3 abilities that are really strong, and it costs 3 mana, but the Timmy... oh god, now I can't even remember. The Timmy Blood Artist is a 6/5 6/5 for 6 mana, and it has just as good of abilities on it, if not worse, but it costs more. That just doesn't make sense to me, but this is really, really good commander. We were kind of joking on it, but I took a second, looked at it, I was like, you could get really tricky with this and, you know, really just kind of make some stuff happen out of nowhere. It seems kind of chaosy to me.
There are definitely decks that I could imagine running it in. Like I have a toolbox deck that just runs a bunch of generically good creatures to try to adapt to different board states and situations. I could maybe put it in there. It would be kind of an interesting commander. Maybe if you have some kind of political goatee kind of deck, it could be interesting in there. But to me, it's just I don't like seeing just a planeswalker creature. You know, like it feels like lazy design. Like remember in the custom episode of our Commander Gameplays series where we all made our own commanders? This is what it looks like to me. It looks like that. It looks like something that a Timmy made, and then it somehow got through game design without anyone asking questions. it feels like a custom card. It doesn't feel like an actual Magic card. It just kind of seems goofy. But you're right. There are some really cool things you can do with it. It's really funny to think that someone doesn't block the commander because they're like, oh, I got an extra turn before I have to worry about commander damage. And you're like, actually, psych. That's funny. Giving the death touch, I think, is actually more relevant because there are so many times where you're chump blocking just to stay alive. If you activate that and you give the chump blocker death touch, you're trading upwards at that point.
Dude, imagine
there's a lot of situations where this card's actually kind of good.
Imagine giving someone else's chump blocker death touch out of nowhere when no one expects it.
Yeah.
And here's another thing. If you build a commander deck around this as your commander, you throw Hearthstone in there, dude.
Yeah.
Now you're cooking.
Yeah, and leave it to Preston to add Trostani to his list.
Yeah, I thought about talking about it as an honorable mention, but I figured Preston was gonna definitely bring it up.
So good.
It is pretty cool. Are you thinking about building it?
I mean, I already have original Trostani that I just finished upgrading here recently. Just got a couple cards waiting to come in, so I'm not sure. Probably not, but imagine giving like Galta double strike.
Just
I love Magic.
Automatically someone loses half their life. Oh, that'd be so funny. So, Jason, why don't you go ahead and talk to us about your next card?
So my next card, I'm going to say this. All the cards in my top 5 are black, white, or black and white. But my next card on this list is Treacherous Greed. Treacherous Greed, it's a 3 mana, 1 generic, 1 white, 1 black for an instant, and it says as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature that dealt damage this turn. Note it doesn't say combat damage, it just says dealt damage. Draw 3 cards, each opponent loses 3 life, and you gain 3 life. What?
Doesn't this have to go in your Thalise deck? This has to go in there, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely, 100,000% it does. That's why it's one of my favorite cards. There's so much value printed on this card, especially if you're playing a deck where your creatures are dealing damage a lot, or you're making a lot of creatures that are going to deal some damage to something. I mean, this could go into, obviously it has to have the colors, but a deck where you're like just pinging stuff where it's like, tapping creatures to deal damage, stuff like that. Just 3 mana, draw 3 cards, deal 3 damage to each opponent, gain 3 life. Yeah, you do have to sacrifice a creature to that, but how many cards have we gotten that have that as an additional cost, sacrificing a creature? This creature has to deal damage, so it's a little bit more specific. But I'm pretty sure we're going to be swinging with creatures in the game, dealing damage to them, or at the very least, blocking with creatures. That's another thing. If you block with a creature and your creature lived, you could sacrifice it on their turn after they attacked because it's an instant. Draw 3 cards, gain 3 life, and your opponents lose 3 life. So now your opponent just attacked you. You block. They didn't do any damage to you. And now you draw 3 cards and they lose 3 life and you gain 3 life. It just seems like a lot of value for not an excessive cost. So I really like this card.
I will run 3 mana draw 3s almost all the time, just because that's just a really good early game, good return rate on card draw.
1 mana per card? That's insane.
And this is that with upside.
Usually it's 2 mana per card?
Ish. Yeah, it depends. It tends to get better as you go higher up on the mana cost. But I mean, think of how many, as far as like early to mid game card draw, this is really, really efficient. Just pay 3 mana, draw 3 cards. I will play a lot of those cards anyways. Treacherous Greed is better than that because it's that. And then you're also like, think Painful Truths. I play Painful Truths in almost every black deck. This is better because now my opponents are losing the life instead of me. I'm gaining life. And then think of all the decks where sacrificing something is actually upside. In decks that specifically want things to die, you sacking a creature isn't even a downside. On top of the fact that it just incidentally will happen anyways, especially in decks like your Thalise deck where you're going wide, you're going to have a lot of things that you're going to be able to get in the damage, and because you have so many creatures and they're going so wide, you don't mind losing the thing anyways, especially when you're going to be draining the table for a total of 9 damage, and then you're going to gain 3. This is sweet.
This is also a card that is absolutely going to go in my Miracle deck.
Yeah, that would be good in there.
It's going to be really good in that deck because it's a sacrifice outlet on an instant, so I can turn one of my creatures back into an enchantment, and then I get 3 cards and deal 9 damage to my opponents in total, and then gain 3 life. I just think this is such a good card. Yeah, also, the art is pretty sick. I'm a fan of the art.
The paint strokes on this are awesome. This is amazing art. Anything to add, Preston?
I mean, I don't have the religious fervor for it you two do, but yeah, no, this is a fantastic card. Definitely one of the best draw spells we've gotten recently, especially for a white-black deck. There's no bad aspect of this card, really.
This might be the best Orzhov draw spell.
Maybe. I mean, not literally every deck can play because the sack creature that dealt damage this turn is relevant. That is a hoop to jump through. I'm just thinking that there are a lot of decks where that's not going to be much of an ask. There's a lot of decks that will just be able to do that, and it's not that much of a hoop to jump through.
And even, I think, you talked about early and mid game. I think this is even good late game.
It is.
Where,
late game, you might just accidentally kill someone with this, too.
Yeah. It's
life
good.
Might matter.
It's good late game because you're dealing 3 damage to people. But you're also getting 3 cards. I mean, how many times have you been in the late game of a game of Commander where you're like, I need cards. I need to find something to save me right now. And most of the time, you're getting, 1 draw at a time, maybe 2 draws. But being able to look at 3 cards when you're trying to find an answer, it's just a real nice value to have in the late game.
Yeah, the only thing that would make it better is
life changes.
That's insane.
I was going to... Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that would make it better is if damage still used the stack.
Oh, man.
Your creature's about to die because it just dealt damage, and then in response you flash this in.
Oh, man.
First strike.
Oh, man.
Oh, first strike.
First
that's
strike.
True. That's true. That's true.
And white has a decent amount of first strike stuff in it.
All right, we're going to try going a little bit quicker. We got quite a few more cards to go through, so we'll try picking up the pace a little bit. But we have some spicy cards to hit, so we'll see what happens. Next up on my list is Archdruid's Charm. What the heck is this card? For green, it's an instant that says, choose one. Search your library for a creature or a land card, reveal it, put it onto the battlefield tapped if it's a land, otherwise put it in your hand, then shuffle. Okay, first of all, if that's all this card was, I would probably play it, but it keeps going. There's 2 other modes. Mode number 2, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and then it bites another creature, or exile target artifact or enchantment. This card is insane. I feel like this card power-wise is playable in a lot of decks outside of Commander. Like, imagine if green was easy for Tron. That would be so good. And I think any like green-based, the problem is there's not a ton of like green-based decks that are going to have a good time trying to cast green. But in Commander, that's pretty easy, especially when you have cards like Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, stuff like that, where it's going to fix all of your mana, and now it all taps for green anyways.
A land that we don't really talk about just because none of us can afford it. Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah. Or flipping over the Growing Rights of Iklamok, then it's basically just better.
But you can't search that into your hand with this card.
Right, that's true. But even like the 4 and 5 color decks, because of cards like Yavimaya, and then you have a base of green because you need the Farseeks and the 3 visits and stuff to fix your lands and fix your colors. Even those decks are going to be able to play this. This is insane because if you have a specific creature you need, you can go find it. If you need to get rid of a problematic creature, you can get rid of it. There's a 1 ring on the battlefield. You can get rid of it. And then like it is also just 3 mana non-basic ramp. Like it will grab any land for 3 mana and put it directly onto the battlefield. Surprise block. Here's a Field of the Dead. I have a blocker. You thought you were gonna kill me? Haha, joke's on you. Flash in your Glacial Chasm and fog your opponents. There's some really ridiculous stuff you can do with this card.
I was just
what the heck is
thinking,
this card?
It does
I was
come in
just-
tapped, the land.
Yeah, but there's so many lands where
Yeah.
you don't care. Like a lot of them just have
if Field
static
of the Dead-
abilities or
If Field of the Dead enters the battlefield tapped, that doesn't matter. You're still getting the zombie.
yeah.
Yeah.
This card's
Um,
freaking insane. Or you grab
I
your
was just
Vesuva
thinking-
and it copies your Field of the Dead.
Thespian stage.
Well, at least you'll have to wait till you have some more mana. But yes, it can. This card can just do. This card does literally everything. It's ramp when you need ramp. It's creature removal when you need creature removal, and it's artifact and enchantment removal when you need that. This card's insane.
Or you can find
For
your best
3
creature.
Yeah, this card is
Probably-
3 mana.
Probably the most versatile green instant. I mean, I can't think of one that's more versatile than this card just because of the different things that you can do with it. I was just thinking pairing this card with Treacherous Greed in my Miracle deck. So I give a creature the counters, I have that creature deal damage to something, and then I sacrifice it with Treacherous Greed, draw 3 cards, gain 3 life, deal 3 damage to each opponent, get that creature back as an enchantment. Oh, the value, Morgan.
And that was
value. It's
That was
right
the worst
there.
mode you just picked.
Yeah, that's the
I
worst
know.
mode, and it's still good.
I know. It's so good. I like this card a lot. Again, this was going to be one that was in my top 5, but it was in Morgan's top 5 first.
I would have let you grab it.
Nah,
I'm
I
just
like the
glad we're
card.
talking about it because this card's insane.
I like the controversial first card that I had,
Yeah.
and I probably would have
think
had to
three-
take that off.
I think 3 green makes it not quite staple level, but it's close.
Well,
it's
like I said, with-
mono green staple, I think. Mono
Oh,
green
for sure.
staple.
But even then, like I said, with cards like Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, or if you're playing Cultivates and your Signets and stuff like that, I feel like there are
Or
very
what's
few
the- what's-
decks that won't be able to cast this. I mean, and
What's
it's
that
also
one
a card that
creature?
you don't care if you play it on turn 3. Like
What's
having
that
3...
one creature that's Gaia's Cradle on a creature?
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about?
yeah, it's an elf druid. What is the name of that?
Yeah.
I think it might be from the D&D set. Maybe
If we can't think of the name right now, I'll figure it out, and it'll be on screen when we talk about it.
gonna
But
get there
yeah,
with that.
I mean, you get that card in here, and now these 3 green pips don't mean anything.
Well, and the only other point I had about that is that this is a card that you probably don't even want to play on turn 3. Like, yes, having green on turn 3, that's probably hard for a lot of decks outside of mono green. However, most decks will get there by the mid game, and this is like a mid game card. If you need the land, you can get the land. If you need the creature, if you need the to remove something, this is a card that is good early game, but it's even probably better late game. So I think then the cost doesn't even matter. I don't even think it's that much of a cost. I think it's probably still easy to cast.
That's fair.
I think this sits in your hand as a removal spell until you need it to be a tutor. That's the way I look at it. I look at it as you hold it up, unless you're going to win the game by, pumping up your creature with the +1/+1 counter and then getting rid of somebody's last blocker or something like that.
Or if someone there's so many niche situations where this card will just swing the game in your favor, because it's also like, we can't overlook the exile target artifact or enchantment. If someone has a 1 ring and they're getting too much value, that's got to go. If they got the ghostly prison and that's what's keeping you from attacking them, that's got to go. There's so many situations where this is just going to swing the game.
It being
really
exile
good
instead of
card.
destroy is big.
Oh yeah.
Really good
Oh, yeah.
card.
Preston, why don't you walk us through your next card?
Okay, we got Case of the Crimson Pulse. It's a new case enchantment type. It's 2 in a red, and it reads, when this case enters the battlefield, you discard a card, then you draw 2 cards. Pretty normal red stuff. Then to solve it, you have to have no cards in hand, achievable in a red deck. And then solved at the beginning of your upkeep, discard your hand, then draw 2 cards. So I put this card on my list almost exclusively for my Krenko deck, because that deck has a really hard time not running out of gas in the mid to late game. Like, I'll play out all my goblins, all my other spells, not really have much to do, have 1 land in my hand, then I'm just sort of sitting there top decking for the rest of the game. This is going to be so good in that deck and plenty of other red decks, so I really like this one. This is probably my favorite case of the bunch.
So I think that in Commander, I don't think I'm interested in running this because card advantage is so plentiful nowadays. But I do know you don't like the exile cards from the top of your library card advantage that red gets, so I could see like what you trying to avoid that. But I will say that think back to like 2018 to 2020, like that standard era, like the red decks of that time were going empty-handed all the time. And then there was those cards like that red enchantment from Throne of Eldraine. There was that red creature that did something similar. There were cards that would let you play cards from the top of your library if you ran out of cards. Like those, and that was just consistently happening. Or there was Hazoret from Amonkhet, which said it can't attack unless you have no or almost no cards, but it's like this 3-mana or 4-mana 5/5 or whatever the heck it was. Like those kind of decks in like standard and stuff, they're gonna love this. I don't think a deck like that currently exists in standard because we have like just these mid-range piles that are dominating the format. So I think the aggro decks are gonna have too hard of a time. They need real card advantage instead of this. But this is awesome if a deck like that can scrape out into existence.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's not a card that I plan on playing necessarily, but I think for 3 mana, that first ability is essentially, is it Faithless Looting?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of cards like that where it's, like Thrill of Possibility.
Yeah, it's essentially that card on an enchantment, and then, I don't know, it just seems like to solve it, if you're in the right deck and you're getting rid of all the cards in your hand and that's a typical thing for you, then yeah, throw it in there. It'll provide you with some value. But I rarely want to be in games or in a situation in games where I don't have any cards in my hands, so I would never get to solve it, and then it would just sit on the battlefield as an enchantment that drew me 2 cards and made me discard a card.
It's helping you ascend faster by having more permanence in play.
Yeah, I guess there it is. I ascend faster. It's decent. This is not my favorite. Probably not going to be playing it myself, but you know, I could see the value in it.
I would maybe put it
I really think this is only good in mono red, pretty much. As soon as you get any other color in there with better card draw than red has, you don't really need this.
I could maybe see putting it in my Ragavan deck. I have a mono red Ragavan deck that just cares about stealing cards from my opponent. And I could see maybe putting it in there, but I feel like the card advantage in that deck is already pretty decent, so I don't even know if I need this, but it's something to keep in mind for sure. Jason, why don't you walk us through your next card?
So my next card, it's a doozy. It's Doorkeeper Thrull. Doorkeeper Thrull, it's a 1 white and 1 generic for a creature Thrull, and it's a 1/2 with flash and flying, and it says artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Putting that on a 1/2 flyer with flash and only making you spend 2 mana to play it? Whoa. That's freaking great. Somebody casts the 1 ring, and in response to their casting that, you pay 2 mana and you flash this out. Now their 1 ring doesn't protect them from anything.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Oh my gosh, dude. I love this card. I think that there's so many cool things that you can do with it. It's definitely going to go into every deck that I have that has white.
Well, you're so annoying.
Yeah.
It is even better than it reads, just because think how many creatures we play in Commander specifically that are just ETB do a thing. You know, there's Baleful Strix, Spirited Companion, Eternal Witness. There's Dockside Extortionist. There's all these cards that we only play them, not for their big body, not for their ability to contribute to combat, but because they enter the battlefield and immediately give you value. And the fact that it has flash is so annoying. Like, you're like, oh, I'm safe to play out my 1 ring, or oh, I'm safe to play out my little doggo Spirited Companion. And you're like, oh, you want to draw a card? That's cute. For only 2 mana. This card's really annoying. I think it's perfectly fair because it doesn't have any kind of protection. It's only a 1/2. It seems fair as far as these kind of effects go. It's no Elish Norn Mother of Machines. You know, it's not that bad. But
could you imagine just being that jerk that plays this in response to someone casting their Solemn Simulacrum?
That'd be so funny.
That's how you get into a fist fight.
Yeah, Preston, do you have anything to add, or are you just going to cringe?
I hate Jason.
This card's so good.
I think
That's what I have to add to the conversation.
I hate Jason. Yeah, that's fair. I think the only other thing I would add is that I don't know if there's any specific decks I would put this in, just because I feel like you're not going to have it when you need it. And then when you do have it, a lot of the times, like if someone's like really problematic, like they're playing a blink deck or something, then obviously you want this, right? Because it's going to, give you time to figure out how to deal with that player. However, you're often not going to have it in your hand when you need it. And then when you do have it, you're just hurting the poor soul who doesn't need that happening. You're hitting the guy who was playing the Spirited Companion, and they're like, sad face, like you're just being a jerk. You're not helping.
Jason's just jealous of my Gyruda deck.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah,
man, this just
so
totally shuts Gyruda off. That's so cool. Hey, and I don't hate anything about Gyruda. I played Gyruda in the episode where we played your decks. I love that deck. I don't like playing against it. Also, right. Morgan, when did you get to Ixalan, brother?
Yeah, you like my friend? I'm filming, like we said at the beginning of this video, we're filming some paper gameplay, or some arena gameplay today. So I'm doing that after this. So I set up my green screen.
Well, be safe out there, man. The dinosaurs be going crazy in Ixalan.
No, Colossal Dreadmaw's my friend. He's a
cool
buddy?
Guy.
He's a cool guy. Yeah. Just
he's
scratch his nose.
He's looking at you with some murderous intent.
Colossal Dreadmaw.
Strongest creature in the game.
Yeah. My next card is Alquist Proft, Master Sleuth. For 1 white blue, he's a human detective, legendary creature, 3/3 with vigilance. When he enters the battlefield, you investigate, meaning you create a clue token. And then you can pay X, white, blue, tap it, sacrifice a clue token to draw X cards, you gain X life. Now, I am building a clue deck right now. I ordered the new precon that's clues. I'm going to upgrade it. I'm probably going to make it Esper instead of Bant because I'm a degenerate. This is probably going to go in there. But the main thing I really like about this card is the flavor. All right, I think we've talked about before that the flavor of the set is awesome. Think about it, guys. Okay, so we're on Ravnica. When we think old school Ravnica, what's one of the most iconic cards we think of? It's Sphinx's Revelation. His last ability is literally Sphinx's Revelation, and he's sacrificing a clue to do it. The clue gives him a revelation in the case. It's awesome. This card's great.
when I think of Ravnica, like OG Ravnica, the first card I always think of is Cyclonic Rift.
Well, yeah, but Sphinx's Revelation is probably in the top few cards that you think about, right? It was like an all-star in multiple formats. I really like this card. I think it's perfectly fair. Like, it's not degenerate. You're not doing anything stupid with it. I mean, maybe it's okay in like blink decks, maybe in my rune deck it would be okay because it's just going to ETB, get a clue token if you can flicker it, or if you have Panharmonicon out, you can get multiple clues, which is nice. And then assuming it gets to survive, you can do the Sphinx's Revelation stuff. So there are obviously decks where this is good, but it's not like power level wise, it's not really that much. It's not worth spending that much time talking about it, but the flavor, man, the flavor
is there. And I love that. You know how I feel about flavorful cards, but my thing with this is, its ability. I mean, I would almost rather pay 2 mana to sacrifice the clue token to draw a card as opposed to paying 5 mana to sacrifice the clue, draw 2 cards and gain 2 life.
You did not play Modern when Sphinx's Revelation was the new thing.
No.
Like, the late game Sphinx's Revelation, you did not come back from that. Your opponent, if someone Sphinx's Revelation late game where X is equal to like 3 or more, there's no way in heck you're that game is not going well, all right? It was awesome. Now granted, Magic, so the power creep has been so absurd that I don't even think that's, like I said, this power level wise, this card's not insane or anything. I just like it.
It's cool. The flavor alone does it for me.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add, Preston?
Yeah, I mean, I like this card okay. I'm always a big fan of the life gain. I like drawing some cards, but this is definitely a very Morgan card. You've always been a fan of blink creatures with ETBs. You've always been a fan of clues. This is Morgan the card.
Well, yeah, I think the first set to have clues was Shadow over Innistrad, and that was the set that I started playing with. So, Preston, you have a spicy next card. Take it away.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, we're finally here, boys. Talked about her for a second earlier. Judith, Carnage, Connoisseur. 3 black and a red for a legendary creature human shaman. She's a 3/4, and she has Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, choose one. That spell gains Death Touch and Lifelink, or you can create a 2/2 red imp creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. I don't even really need to say anything, just Starve Extinction. Oh, I want to do that so bad.
Oh, that would
All
be
right,
so funny.
next card. No. What else do you need to say about it? I mean, it's Death Touch and Lifelink, that's just nuts.
I think for 5 mana, that's kind of a lot to ask for, but you are in black and you're in red, which are the 2 burst colors. So your opponents might be like, they got 2 lands, they got their Signet, we got time. And then you surprise them with some kind of ritual effect and Judith comes down and you follow it up with something else. Like, there are times where that's going to happen. But I also like that there's multiple ways you can play this, because all of a sudden Shock is playable in Commander. What? There's all these like little pingy, small bits of damage kind of cards that are really good. Obviously, it's insane if you're doing like, Blasphemous Act or Star of Extinction or something like that. That's insane, obviously. You give those Death Touch and Lifelink. That's insane. But it's also like if you kind of wanted to go like the Stormy route, then it's a pretty good token commander as well. So I like that there's multiple ways that you can take it. But you're right. The funny thing is to Blasphemous Act or Star of Extinction and then give it Lifelink and just have like a trillion life.
Well, I've already started working on this commander online, and the token creation is actually important for those black spells that are like sacrifice a creature, draw a card.
True.
So you do that to begin, fill up your hand with all your damage spells, then you start dealing damage to everything. That's how I think you want to play her.
I think all 3 of us have thought about building this.
Yeah.
I wrote off that second
100%.
ability at first, but
because
it's very good for that.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, this is definitely one of those cards that I could play it as my commander and then just build an entire deck with cards I already have. I wouldn't need to buy a single card for this deck. I know I wouldn't if I was going to build it, in the giving my spells Death Touch and Lifelink mode. But I think the strongest way to implement this card is you play it. And I mean, obviously, you want to play it earlier in the game. You don't want to be playing your commander on turn like 9 or 10 for the first time. Ideally, if you could play it out on turn 3 or 4 for the first time, that would be good. But I think you play it, and then you play something cheap that doesn't necessarily do damage, nothing that you're necessarily going to give Lifelink and Death Touch to, and you just make a 2/2. Now, for 6 mana, you've just put 5 power on the board, split up among 2 creatures. Both of those creatures have abilities that will do something to impact the game in some way. The token dealing damage to each opponent when it dies. Your commander giving your spells, Death Touch and Lifelink, or making more creatures. I think that's the right way to play this when you get it onto the battlefield. Like, if you're playing this and you don't have a spell, an instant, or sorcery to cast immediately after to get that value, it might not be the best time to play it. But this is a really, really strong commander. And there's a lot of really fun deck building ideas for it. I mean, you really could just do mono, like red, burn spells. Like, you could just fill this whole deck with just as many red burn spells as you can, give all of them Death Touch and Lifelink, gain a bunch of life, prevent your opponents from ever having a creature onto the battlefield, and then just slowly win that war of attrition by dealing as much damage to them as possible with either the 2/2s that you're making that are dying or all of the burn spells that you have. Really, really fun looking commander.
Yeah, and Preston said he was building this on Magic Online. I will say that if you don't play Magic Online, this card is a great supporter of trying Magic Online, because as much as I want to build Judith, I've built so many Rakdos decks. I've wanted to build so many other Rakdos decks. But if you play it on Magic Online, then you don't ever need more than one copy, right? Like, I can build as many Rakdos decks as I want, and I only have to buy the few cards I don't already have. I don't have to re-buy a bunch of cards. So, huge advocate for Magic Online. Yes, it's kind of old and ugly and clunky, but you get to do awesome things. So,
well, one more thing I want to say about this. If nobody in our play group builds Judith as a commander deck, like in real life, I'm 100% going to.
Oh no, that's what I actually meant when I said online earlier. Like, I've been getting the deck list ready online. But I might also build it on MTG online. I really like this commander.
And she's mom.
So my my number 2 card It's a mono white card, and it's Delney. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
I think it's Delney.
Delney, Streetwise Lookout. It's 2 generic and a white for a legendary creature, Human Scout. It's a 2/2, and it says creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. If an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So,
What the heck?
I think that this is a great example of white being the best support color. Because to me, you put this into a Boros deck where you're going to double up things like Dockside Extortionist, or you put it into an Orzhov deck. I think that this is just a card that goes in the 99, maybe not mono white. I don't know a whole lot of mono white creatures with 2 power or less that have a really good ETB, or not even ETBs. Like, it's just any ability.
Yeah, mono white loves little creatures.
Any triggered ability. Oh man,
it gets
Esper Sentinel.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, the more and more I think about it, the more, and that's why I had this at number 2. Because just the more and more that I thought about it, like every time I thought about something, it only made the card better. And this is just really, really powerful creature to have. I mean, 3 mana, it is a 2/2, so it's pretty vulnerable to removal. But you could really just play this out in the late game when you have a board full of like 2/2s or something.
Probably just win there.
Well, what you could do is you swing out with all your 2/2s, like even if you only have like 6 or 7 2/2s, something that's not going to be necessarily game ending. It's only going to be like 14, 16 damage, something like that. But you swing with them, and then, they can't be blocked, so no one can declare blockers. So after the blockers are declared, before damage, you pump them all up. And you make them stronger, because we've already passed the blocking step.
Yep.
So you can't put a blocker on it, and then you just make them really strong before you deal damage. I think that this might be the best white card from the set.
It's up there. There's a lot of other things I could add. Preston, why don't you go first so that you can maybe check some of the things off my list?
I mean, I was just going to be like, white loves its little weenies. That 2 to 3 range, a lot of it is 3, admittedly, but yeah, it loves doing stuff with creatures that are around that 2 to 3 range. So mono white with this card is still going to be good, but yeah, there's just so many things you could do with it. What's the artifact creature we mentioned earlier? He comes in, draws a card. When he dies, you search for a land.
Oh, so
you're talking about Solemn, but that's backwards.
Oh yeah, sorry.
But still, when it
still.
ETBs, you're gonna search for an additional land. When it dies, you're gonna draw an additional card.
This card is very powerful.
Yeah, this is a card that the longer you think about the implications, the stronger it gets, because there are so many like white weenie decks where this is obviously going to be great, because if you have a bunch of 1/1s, whatever, what does it matter if they can't get in the points of damage? This lets you get in the points of damage. So obviously it's also good if you have just like a bunch of tokens, like in token decks. This is probably pretty good. Think about how many things just accidentally that have entered the battlefield effects that are power 2 or less. Every card that we've talked about that has an ETB and more are in that range, because a lot of what you're doing is you're paying 2 or 3 mana for this small creature, but the upside is that has some other kind of effect. You're now doubling that up. That's insane. So even like most blink decks are probably going to want this anyways. And then even non-blink decks, you're probably incidentally going to have a bunch of those creatures anyway. So it's at least worth double checking to see if this is worth adding. It might be. I know I have at least a couple decks I need to put this in, because like my mono white deck is God Eternal Oketra. And the idea of the deck is I'm playing a bunch of these white weenie creatures that they enter the battlefield, do a thing, but they're just a bunch of small creatures. They don't do anything else. So, and the idea of winning through combat is you're using the tokens that Oketra gives you. But now with Delney, not only am I doubling up those triggers, but now I don't have to rely on the Oketra tokens to end the game. I can use the creatures I was already playing to help finish the job, because Delney's going to make them unblockable. This card's insane.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's probably the strongest white card in the set, but that's just me personally. And I think that it's better as a part of the 99 than it is in the command zone necessarily. I think it is a really strong commander, and
It could be,
you could definitely build a deck that takes big advantage of one or both of the abilities. But I think that where it's really going to shine is throwing it into like an Azorius deck, an Orzhov deck, a Boros deck, a Selesnya deck, something like that. I think that as a support card, it's going to be insane.
Yeah, I think for all of your white decks, just double check. See if you have a bunch of creatures with ETB effects. See if you have a bunch of small creatures. It might just be worth running into 99.
Even necessarily ETB effects. You know, it can also be dies. Any triggered ability that you think would be good if you got it twice instead of once. Which, spoiler alert, that's most of them.
You probably do. So we have I know we're running a little bit long, but we have a couple awesome cards that we still need to talk about. So next up on my list, my number 2 card is Krenko's Buzzcrusher. For 2 red, it's an insect thopter artifact creature that's a 4/4 with flying and trample. And then when Krenko's Buzzcrusher enters the battlefield, for each player, destroy up to 1 non-basic land that player controls. For each land destroyed this way, its controller may search their library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So that's like the fair kind of land destruction we get nowadays, is that it replaces itself. But there's so many situations where if you just have enough of those effects, it's just real land destruction. Especially, like, think of all the 4 or 5 color piles that they don't even have a lot of basics in there. You do these kind of effects enough, and you're just actually strip mining those people. And then it's for each player. So for 4 mana, you're blowing up to 4 lands, because you're going to hit all of... And there's also just a lot of problematic lands, right? We've already talked about a lot of them. You know, Field of the Dead, Gaia's Cradle, Maze of Ith. There's all these problematic lands that you might just need to get rid of. Or if you really need to keep someone off of their one specific color, you can hit their Urborg, you can hit their Cabal Coffers, their Nykthos. It doesn't target, so it also gets around the hexproof on Lotus Field. That's pretty special. That might mean that this is playable in formats outside of... it might be playable in like Pioneer or something like that. And then it's also a 4 mana 4/4 flyer with trample. That's pretty good. And I don't think you're going to want to do this very often, but you can hit one of your own lands as well. So like maybe you're in a 3-color deck. You only have 2 of your colors. You need to go find your 3rd color. So you can blow up one of your own lands to go find a basic for the color you still need. You're probably not going to want to do that very often, but it's an option. And I like having options when I play Commander. This is also going in my Osgir deck, which I just played on Friday's episode of Upkeep. This is going in there because I can make token copies of it with Osgir. This card's awesome.
If you have landfall.
Yeah, and it works with landfall. It works with artifact decks. It works with landfall decks. It's land destruction if you want to go that way. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with this card.
I honestly... It could have stopped at a 4/4 flying trampler for 4 mana. That's good enough for me.
To me, that's the upside.
It's got a super powerful ability as far as putting your opponents back, because imagine destroying somebody's like Cabal Coffers or Gaia's Cradle or something like that, and now they just get a forest or a swamp.
Yeah.
It's a real way to set somebody back. Especially in a color that has not gotten the most love over the years. I mean, they always give us really, really powerful, good green stuff for some reason. We always get good blue cards.
White's in power creep mode right now.
That white, they have started to give out more white cards just to boost it and make it more competitive with the other colors. Red hasn't gotten a whole lot. So while this is kind of minuscule as far as some of the other stuff that we've gotten for the other colors, I think that it's a really good way for red to kind of slow the rest of the players at the table down and allow you some time to catch up, because now you're taking away some of their better lands. They have worse lands that they have to put onto the battlefield, and you have a 4/4 flying blocker with trample that's going to potentially ward off attacks.
It's also an ETB, so I know there's not a lot of red flicker decks, but if you do have a flicker deck that has red, that's worth mentioning. There's also, just because it's also an artifact creature, there's also just accidental synergies there as well. It's really cool. I'm really hyped about this card. Like I said, there's for sure the Osgir deck that I'm going to put this in, but as I've been saying here, I'm like, actually, there's 2 or 3 other decks I could put this in. So I'm pretty excited about this. I also just like this effect. Just like I said, there's so many problematic non-basic lands nowadays, especially in Commander. It's worth having at least a couple of these effects in your decks. All right, Preston, if you didn't have anything else to add about Krenko's Buzzcrusher, why don't you talk to us about your number 1 card?
All right, here we are at the end. Prisoner's Dilemma. It's a sorcery for 3 and 2 red. Each opponent secretly chooses silence or snitch. Then the choices are revealed. If each opponent chose silence, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 4 damage to each of them. If each opponent chose snitch, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 8 damage to each of them. Otherwise, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 12 damage to each opponent who chose silence, and it has flashback for 5 and 2 red. I just love this dumb card. It's probably not that good. I probably should have swapped it with Judith as my card of the set, but man, there's just something about this that really tickles my fancy. Just dealing out all that damage to people. I love a good politics card. Voting cards are something that have been really interesting to me lately. So just, I'm a big fan of what this card is trying to do.
I think you're right. I don't think, as far as power level goes, I don't think this card's actually that good. But the times where you're actually going to deal 12 to people, that's going to be really funny.
Dude, I think that this card is so fun because you could imagine you cast it if you have a deal with a player, like at the table, just like it's you and them versus the other 2 players essentially. You just kind of give them a little.
It's like, you know what to do.
And they choose snitch and everybody else chooses silence and then they take 24 damage. 24!
So good.
They did have to make it only your opponents choose because otherwise you're basically dealing 12 damage almost every time you play it.
Then you could just rig it yourself. That'd be pretty funny.
I think the flashback cost is too much. I don't think it needs to be 7 mana to flash this back.
Flashback is usually a higher cost than the initial cost, though, so that doesn't...
No, look at Echo of Eons.
Sure. I will say that I do really like political cards. I like basically all formats for different reasons. Like, I love 60-card formats. I still probably prefer 60-card formats over Commander. But what's awesome about Commander is the political stuff. So anything that lets you lean into that, I'm here for it, baby. I'm here for it. Jason, I think it's time for your number 1 card.
All right. So for my number 1 card of Murders at Karlov Manor, I chose Kaya, Spirit's Justice. It's Planeswalker, legendary Planeswalker Kaya for 2 generic, a white and a black. It has a static ability that says whenever 1 or more creatures you control and or creature cards in your graveyard are put into exile, you may choose a creature card from among them. Until end of turn, target token you control becomes a copy of it, except it has flying. And then it has +2, surveil 2, then exile a card from a graveyard. +1, create a 1/1 white-black spirit creature token with flying. And then -2, exile target creature you control. For each other player, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. Exile a Blightsteel, turn a 1/1 flyer into a Blightsteel. Whoa. That sounds fun. Or exile Ulamog. Or Emrakul. There's so many fun things to do with this card. And my favorite part about it is you don't even have to pay any loyalty or add loyalty or anything like that to get that ability. It's a static ability that just sits on the Planeswalker. So now all of a sudden somebody path to exiles, your Ulamog. Now you can turn one of your tokens into Ulamog. And you didn't have to pay anything to do that besides the 4 mana for this Planeswalker. You can it can enter the battlefield, and you can immediately ult it, which, granted, its ult isn't the most overwhelming thing ever, but the fact that, the Planeswalker can come in and you can activate its ultimate, still capitalize on its ultimate ability, and affect your opponent's gameplay, I think that for 4 mana, the value that this card presents is just undeniable, and to me, it is the best card in this set.
Preston, what do you think?
Uh,
Other than that, it's a
mean,
lot of words.
And
it
you
is
don't even-
very powerful.
Sorry, one more thing I want to add. You don't even have to be playing a tokens deck to do this. All you need to do is +1 it to make a token. And now you're set up. Now you're good to go.
I was going to say 4 mana, exile 1 creature from each person. That could just be playable on its own, to be honest.
I'm so torn on this card.
And the fact that even though you're exiling 1 creature from each player, even though you're exiling one of your own things, you're probably the only one at the table that is going to get value from exiling that card.
So obviously if you're playing a token deck in these colors, it's probably pretty good. What's weird about it is that it has to be something from it can be from anyone's exile, right? That the token can become a copy of? Or does it have to be your exile?
Whenever one or more creatures you control and or creature cards in your graveyard are put into exile.
Okay, I see. Okay, so this is a lot of words. It's a lot to keep track of. So I'm probably missing something. But I feel like it's a trap because it reads play tokens, but then you need non-tokens to be exiling. And then also, yes, you can just play it generically in these colors because she's kind of a self-sufficient engine. If she gets to stick around long enough, she will give you the token and then she'll fill your graveyard and you're going to be able to exile the stuff on your own. So if she gets to stick around, she'll feel the fire by herself without having to be a token deck. But there's no way to guarantee that she's going to stick around that long, especially with how much Planeswalkers are kind of problematic in Commander because they just don't get to stick very long usually. Unless if you are a token deck, then you probably have enough creatures that you can keep jump blocking. But even then, there's just so much instant speed interaction. There's the Void Rends and the Generous Gifts and the Beast Withins and stuff that just instant speed will get rid of her. And it's so obvious what you're trying to do. You're so obviously trying to do something degenerate with her that people will just want to get rid of her. They're not going to want to let her stick.
I got to stop you right there. I don't think that any argument that is based on, well, what about removal? I don't think that any argument like that is valid because anything is susceptible to removal. Anything is susceptible to removal, dang near. So I'm not going to sit here and go, he's making a good point. What if somebody just Beast Withins it? What if somebody Beast Withins any of the other creatures that we talked about? It's the same thing.
But it's worse with Planeswalkers because they're susceptible to just getting attacked.
And this is another reason why this is a good Planeswalker. It makes a blocker. It has a way to protect itself. Any good Planeswalker has a way to protect itself once it enters the battlefield. Another thing that you're not thinking about, it doesn't say anything about the card having to stay in exile. You could flicker something.
That's true.
You could flicker
that would be pretty interesting.
One of your really big creatures, exile it. When it's exiled, Kaya triggers, you turn a token into a copy of it, and then that card comes back. Now you have 2 of them.
That could be spicy.
I think it's better than you're giving it credit for.
It probably is.
I think that you shouldn't be so hung up on, but what about removal?
It's not just that, Jason. It's all of the things I just said. It's the fact that she, yes, is a lightning rod for removal. It's so blatantly obvious you're trying to do something degenerate with it. And the fact that Planeswalkers don't have to just be removed with a spell. They can just be attacked. And she only makes the one blocker. Now, yes, if you're playing her in an actual token deck, you probably have the chump blockers to protect her. And that's probably the best situation. But even then, I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like it's kind of a trap in a token deck because you need to have other creatures to exile. And that's slots that you're not dedicating your deck towards enabling your token strategy. So I don't know. I could be wrong, but I feel like as strong as it reads, I feel like it's kind of a trap. Preston, what do you think?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say you are wrong.
I might be.
I think I'm a little too torn on it myself, I think. I kind of want to see Jason try it out a few times and watch it try to do its thing before I can really give my full seal of approval or write it off. But if you force me to pick, I think it has the potential to be really good, but yeah, I'm not sure. I think I'm leaning towards Jason, though, slightly.
I think it's obviously built around it. I think as much as it looks like a self-sufficient engine, I think it's probably not. I think you actually have to build around it a little bit to really make sure that you're getting the value out of it, especially because of all the things I mentioned of people are going to see what you're trying to do and get rid of it. So I think you do have to build around it a little bit to guarantee you're getting the full potential out of it. I think the ceiling of this card's insanely high, but I think it's like, how consistent is it? That's what time's going to tell. Let us know in the comments what you think about that one. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up with the last card. This is a boring pick, but it has to be mentioned. My number one card is all of the new Surveil lands, all 10 of them. We're getting the full cycle, all 10 two-color pairs. For example, let's look at Lush Portico. So it's a land that has the corresponding land types for the colors it taps for. So this one, for example, taps for a green and a white, so it's a forest plain. They all enter the battlefield tapped no matter what, but they ETB Surveil 1. These are really good for a lot of reasons. Let's start with the fact that these are fetchable duels. All right? I think that if you're playing like 3, 4, 5 color deck, you probably already have all the fetchable lands you need. But if you're in a 2-color deck, always nice to have more. On top of the fact that Surveil is really good. Like, think about, I could see running like a singleton copy of these in like old formats, like Modern or something, because there are so many times where you're like, you wait to crack your fetch until it comes back to your turn to see what your opponent's going to do. So you see what color you need to grab. And then if you need to interact before it gets back to your turn, you can shock in a shock land, right? You fetch, grab your shock it in, then do it. If they do nothing, what you would normally do is you grab your shock land anyways and then just not pay the 2 life. Well, now you can grab one of these instead of your shock land, and you're getting extra value out of it. So yeah, it's obviously not as good as a shock land, but in those niche situations, it's better. On top of the fact that the Surveil is going to matter for graveyard decks. The graveyard decks are really going to want to have the Surveil. And then because these are looking like we're still in, at the time of recording this, we're still in pre-order season, the most expensive one of these is like $3 or $4. These are kind of budget. So especially the green ones and the white ones on a budget where you can fetch them without having real fetch lands. Because real fetch lands are still expensive, right? On a budget, you're not playing real fetch lands. But there are like, Wide of the Night Orchid, which is a 40-cent card that ETB go find a plains. If someone has more lands than you, you can grab one of these. It's so as a budget fetchable dual land that has all these other upsides that I just mentioned. These are awesome. And I'm going to pick up they're not going to go in all decks, but there's quite a few decks that I'm putting these in. These are pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's nice to have fetchable lands that provide additional value, especially if they're going to be tapped lands. I mean, this feels better than any of the lands that come in and you scry one or you gain a life when they enter the battlefield because they're not fetchable.
And almost always the Surveil is going to be better than the scry. Not always, but a lot of the time.
If you are playing a 2-color deck or even like a 3-color deck and you want to throw some of these in, just, I would say make sure that you're not taking out too many lands that enter untapped and putting in lands that enter tapped. Just kind of make sure that you're being responsible about that. But it is a good cycle of lands, and I'm glad that they're printing out more fetchable lands like this and just giving players options instead of forcing us to go and buy, the shock lands that enter or the triomes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for that reason, that's why I said like a lot of 3-color decks, and then for sure 4 and 5-color decks, you're not going to run many, if any, of these most of the time, because they're always going to enter tapped. But 2-color decks, I feel like they're probably auto-includes. And then there's other decks that, for specific situations, you're for sure going to want them. Like the white and green ones especially, since they're going to be budget. Yeah. Preston, what do you think?
Yeah, these are obviously not the exciting cards of the set, but they're probably the most responsible ones for you to pick up if you can. They're going to make your decks better if they're 2 colors. So, yeah. Not a lot to say about them, but they're good.
Yeah. And then I know I said that even 3-color decks, you're probably not going to want these, but I'm going to encourage Steven to at least get the white ones that go in his Sir Gwyn deck that I built him for the Christmas episode. It's a Mardu, but there's a lot of the white catch-up ramp in that deck, so these, he can grab those and then give him card advantage. And then I'm for sure going to put these in my Muldrotha deck because I care about the graveyard. And then I also have a Grixis Reanimator deck. These are for sure going in there. So they're, even though it's going to slow down your mana base, if you care about that Surveil, or you care about the ramp, the fact that they're fetchable, especially on a budget, you got to keep an eye on these, especially they're cheap. And I assume they're going to stay cheap because we're still in pre-order. Most cards go down in price after pre-orders. I feel like these are awesome. All right. Well, we ran a little bit long, so we're not going to have time for Q&A or something cool outside the world of Magic. But tune in next week. Next episode, I believe we're finally doing what we've been waiting for a long time, the debate, which is better, Ancient Tomb versus Temple of the False God. I believe that's the next episode of the podcast. So make sure you're subscribed and come back for that. And then,
hey,
you know what?
Spoiler alert. The answer is Ancient Tomb.
Yes, it is. And then in the meantime, check out our other videos. We have 30 episodes of gameplay already. I can't believe we've been doing this that long. And then we also have, quite a few other podcast episodes. So, in the meantime, you can check out some of our other videos, and we will be back next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.